Welcome to another episode of the Back to School Shootings podcast. My name is David Reedman. I'm the creator of the K through 12 school shooting database. This is an episode that I really debated whether I wanted to record or not, because last week the FBI released all of the writings from the Covenant school shooting in Nashville 2 years ago. And there was a lot of speculation about these writings before they were released. There were little bits of it that were leaked to some conservative media outlets by a former police officer there. And there's just been so much kind of political and really charged discourse around the perpetrator and the reason behind this attack. But for that reason, I think we need a true expert in this field to dive into what's in these journals. And it's important to note that these are journals, not a manifesto. This is a window into somebody's thoughts and psyche for months or even years before the shooting happened. So the guest today on the show is the resident expert in school shooters' writings, somebody who had a previous episode with me about the actual manifesto from the CVPA school shooting. Dr. Jill Peterson from Hamline University and the executive director of the Violence Project is here today. Jill, thanks for coming back for this pretty heavy discussion.
Thanks for having me, David.
Before we get into this specific set of writing, why do you think it's important for people to take the time to kind of understand what somebody's writing about after they've committed a school shooting? Because we really have to be careful about notoriety and infamy and giving somebody the attention and platform that they want. But also we need to understand these.
Yeah, I don't think there's an easy or right answer to that. I think a couple of years ago, the families involved at Covenant School did not want the writing released, and there's been legal battles. And I was interviewed by a reporter, and I said, I support that. If they don't want it released, let's not release it. Let's listen to the victims. And there is always a chance that, more young people read it, get inspired. It becomes part of this sort of lore around school shootings that seems to be driving a lot of this violence in certain ways. On the other hand, right now that it has been released, I'm a researcher. I find this absolutely fascinating as a forensic psychologist. And I think we can learn a lot from it in terms of, the mind of somebody leading up to this, in terms of how you prevent this, in terms of warning signs. And so I can argue it either way.
And that's, a good point. And we'll present your expert analysis as a trained forensic psychologist, the absolute expert on this type of material. But also there's a link to the document in the show notes as well. So it's a 112-page PDF. As we're talking about it, we'll reference the page numbers. They'll be consistent regardless of where or what form you're looking at. Because this document is really fascinating because it's a collection of so many different types of writing and ideas about life, about feelings, about the attack, about preparing for the attack, about individual identity, but then just all of this really random, weird childhood minutia. I mean, Jill, have you kind of seen anything like this document before?
I haven't, to be honest. A lot of times what gets released as a quote unquote manifesto is something that is really curated by the perpetrator in their final days. And when I've talked to families of perpetrators about kind of famous manifestos, they will say, that was not him, right? That was not his voice. That did not sound like him to me. That was something performative meant to, make everybody read it, but that wasn't truly kind of his voice. I didn't feel like I heard him there because that's what they are, right? They're meant to go out in the world and be performative in that way. This does not read like that to me at all. This reads like a personal journal, like somebody's kind of journey through this period of time that was not produced for public consumption, right? This was a private journal. So it has a very different feel than other ones that I've looked at.
Yeah, and just with, how personal this material is, the first 4 pages of this are handwritten accounting, like literal numbers accounting of how much is in the perpetrator's bank account and where additional money is coming in from a graduation present and a birthday present and cat sitting and line by line accounting of different costs and items, this much for selling a rifle, this much for being ripped off through an attempted purchase of another weapon. This level of kind of detail is something that, you know, we think about somebody who's in the mental state to commit mass violence. There's this false perception that they're totally detached from reality, that they're
Mhm.
in a manic state or in paranoid schizophrenia where they're not interacting with our reality. This is somebody who's very aware of what's going on to the point where they're doing line by line accounting of all of their expenses to prepare for the attack.
Yes, this is I would feels like a compulsive level of preparation, like obsessive compulsive personality disorder is kind of what I look at. Like it's so minute and detailed, and you can just tell all of her focus is on this, right? Like you can see it's just occupying her and total mind space. But yeah, the accounting with the notes, yeah, and it also has an immature feel, right? Like 28-year-olds usually don't like handwrite like I spent $1 here, I got 50 cents here. You know, like there's something about it that feels also quite young to me when I read it.
Yeah, and that's this immediate kind of conflict in this document between really detailed notes about accounting and numbers and training and planning, but also a lot of very detailed lists in here. So once you get into page 5 of this document, this is written a number of months before the attack, and it's before death goal list. And it's broken into different sections around which DVDs to watch, which books to read, art projects to do. And when you start looking at these, this is a 28-year-old person. The things that are on the death list are like watching season 3 of DuckTales and Angry Beavers, watching Rugrats season 2, doing a series of Pokemon fan art, watching all 7 of the Harry Potter movies twice with a check mark under, you know, watching them once, twice, and then slashing out 3 times because there's not time for extra. What what exactly is going on here?
I don't know, to be honest. I've never seen anything like this. It is this very detailed list of things she wants to do before she dies, is my impression. It reads like a I don't know, I have 13 and 11-year-old boys. It reads like a list. But not even. I don't even think they would want to watch DuckTales again, right? Like it reads so young. It very immature, but also like this, it's so organized. And it's so like I got this percentage done here, I got this percentage done here. Um, all kind of counting down to this moment. I mean, it's I don't know. I've never seen anything like it.
And then, you know, it gets down, almost everything is, you know, 100% done on the list until you get, you know, item 10 is the YouTube videos to watch, and then item 11 is the puzzles to complete. And it has the list that, you know, the Kellogg cereal box puzzle, 1,000 pieces, that one's done. The Nickelodeon 90s cartoons puzzle is almost done, but the Kiddens 550-piece puzzle, not done. Only 95% on that list. So it's a weird mix of some really, you know, childlike things, but then it flips right into very adult and very specific planning. So moving ahead, once you get into document pages 15, 16 through 18, those are all blurred out, but those are the maps that were reportedly kind of
Mm.
hand drawn of the
Mhm.
school. And then, you know, we're back into accounting. There are pages of photocopied receipts. And, you know, this is not like an iPhone picture of receipts. Like these look like they were actually photocopied because they're all kind of scattered together with hand notes about the dates that they were purchased on. And so these first, 21 pages or so of the more than 100 that are released are very ordered, very detailed. Somebody who knows what they're doing is in a very lucid state of mind and is organized, and the handwriting is neat and easy to follow. Then all of a sudden on page 22, it's like we're looking at somebody written by a completely different person. There's crazy writing, drawing, words all over the page, darkness, hurts, wrong, nothing on earth saves me. This seems much more like what we've seen in other writings from school shooters and mass killers.
Yes, and it's not totally clear to me if these are in some sort of chronological order, right? Or if from different notebooks or from what the time periods are between them. But it does feel like, on the one hand, there's this person who has decided that they're doing this. They've made this. It's almost like when you have a goal and you break it down to the 100 little things that you have to do to get to that goal because the goal feels too big. So you just start doing the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? And you can just see her moving towards this goal in this very orderly, right, compulsive kind of way. And then some of the other pages are just, they're self-loathing, they're full of hate. There's some, I think, just deep sadness and hopelessness and failure, um, fear. I mean, it's just, they feel really desperate. The writing's all, some pages have 3 words on them and it's expletives, right? Like some have these kind of dark, strange drawings. It does feel like just a different person wrote those.
But there still is a bridge to reality because in those accounting pages at the very start, there are some notes about money lost by getting scammed. And in the mix of these pages, I'm looking at page 23 now, there's this crude drawing and saying, I feel like shit. But on the other side, it says, it's all lie scammers, talking about people cheating me, being more clever than me. Um, these scumbags that claim they're going to pay you the money but they don't. So even as it starts to get into this state that the thoughts are far more erratic, that the writing is no longer organized, it's all over the page, it's still rooted in some of those same experiences that were there in the ordered lists.
Yeah, it's self-loathing and self-hatred mixed with kind of this external whose fault it is hatred of others, right? Like the world is this horrible place doing things to this perpetrator, whether scamming them or politicians or whatever. There's a lot of sort of finger pointing at different groups that are horrible and causing all of her problems. And that is fairly consistent with mass shooters that we've studied, right? It's sort of this self loathing mixed with this very kind of narcissistic, whose fault is it? Everybody's doing this to me, angry piece of it. And I see a lot of that in here.
And then because of that, the only option is needing to die. Writing on page 25, I hurt so bad enough and long enough that I need to die, underlined a whole bunch of times with some weird X's and then some kind of curved, swoopy drawings. No love written, going the opposite direction of all of the other text. But that reminds me, of the last manifesto we talked about, which was the CVPA shooter, where he pretty much finished every single page with saying, I need to die. I want to die. The only solution I have is dying.
Yeah, I mean, we've been looking at this since day one, right? Mass shootings are suicides. And when you read this, the suicidality comes across to me stronger than the homicidality, right? It's her, she wants to die. She doesn't want to be alive. She doesn't want to exist in this horrible world, but she wants to be known in that process. And that is incredibly consistent, right? It is a suicide, but I'm going to make everybody watch it and I'm going to make everybody know my name and hear my thoughts. I'm not just going to kill myself and have nobody know why I'm so angry, right? And so in that way, it does feel like a lot of the other ones that we've seen.
And there's a mix of some things that are solely the internal perceptions or that suicidal ideation coming through that's not really grounded in a specific thing. But there's also some very clear blame on professional failure. So getting into page 28, so the perpetrator was, went to school for graphic design, was doing freelance work around graphic design, and has a section in this about freelance failure shit. You'll always miss 100% of the shots you don't take. I think that's a Michael Jordan quote,
Mhm.
actually.
I think it
But
is
then
too.
writes right under that, I took all of them and missed 99%. What should I shoot at? Like that's some dark dark stuff right there. But then lays out these different freelance projects. The first one is designing a police logo and then having the project get cut off because the person who was in charge of it left the agency. So literally, like, saying you gotta take all your shots. I missed my shots, so now what am I supposed to shoot at? Wait, my first shot was actually doing something for the police department. Then working on an internship for American Spirits, a huge national or international liquor distributor, doing illustration work for a book, um, taking an online commission gig, but it was a scam and getting scammed out of money. That's a recurring theme throughout this, is being taken advantage of by
Mhm.
people. Making a logo for a friend, but that being a failure. And then at the end of this, writing my reality equals freelance won't help shit. Like, just this feeling of defeat.
Yeah, and I mean, psychologists, we call this very black or white thinking, right? Like she's decided she's a failure, and so she's made a list of each of the things she's tried that has not worked out, right? I'm sure there is things here and there that didn't go as badly, but in her mind, she is tracking each of the ones that failed. And I would say also she's doing that with friendships, right? With relationships, with it's like, here's the vision I had for my life. Here's all the people that have failed me and who have wronged me. And I'm alone. Here's all the professional things I've tried and failed at, right? She is in this mind space where the only things in her cognition are the failures. And she is kind of dead set on there's no use in trying anything else anymore.
And then what's weird about those failures, and obviously we don't see any of the pictures of like the police logo that she created or the stuff for the brand, but for going to school for design and being an artist, you have to assume there's some level of you know decent artistic ability. But like when you go to page 31 of the PDF, there's this drawing of like a fractured heart, and it has like lines going in every direction. The text is going all over the place. There are things that are scribbled out. It's like connecting across the page with some other picture. Like, this doesn't seem like the kind of organized thought of somebody who's a trained artist. But what does this kind of scattered type of thinking and writing and drawing say to you in the context of a forensic psychologist?
Yeah, I mean, to me, this looks like someone who is in a state of crisis, and I don't have a sense of what the art that this person produces looks like outside of this. But this, I mean, between the writing, the different sizes, the sort of all over the page, clearly this is someone who is at least visual and sort of like you can see the way that she starts scattering around the page and writing sideways and huge letters and small letters. Like it looks like somebody in a mental health crisis who's falling apart. And it's kind of a visual representation of that, as opposed to the very little tiny check boxes, right? And the long, long detailed lists that you see in other parts of the document.
Uh, and again, we don't know the exact order of these
Right.
things, but
Yep.
once you get to page 33 in the document, there are a couple of the few dated uh, are dated entries. These are on unlined paper, so this is probably in a different notebook. It's really not clear from the way that this is presented what came from where. Some evidence pictures from the car showed that there were, multiple different journals and
Mhm.
things posted online and things in, laptops and cell phones and whatever else. But I think that it's interesting. So this January 16th, 2023, this is about almost exactly 2 months before the attack. It comes back to this idea of being scammed. So the entry is, I got scammed again. And because of this scam, the perpetrator writes, I broke my figurine. I feel sad. I'm angry. I'm so sad. Too much, too long. I hate to leave my animals, my art, my possessions, but the only real thing in me is this world. I'm anxious all the time. But where this gets really strange is then in the second paragraph, I had my favorite meal, chicken nuggets and fries. I listened to 1-800-273-8245 5 times. I want to die. What's that number?
I I don't
It's
know.
the
Do you know
suicide
what
hotline.
Oh, is it? I didn't even
Yeah.
catch that line.
Yeah. So she has called the
Wow.
suicide hotline 5 times and decides that I want to die.
She says, "I've listened to it." Right? Does that mean, like, she's had a conversation with
Maybe
somebody who
it's the options. I haven't called the
Right, or
number.
the menu or something?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious what that is. Yeah, I mean, she has this real sense of, like, perceived injustice, right? The world is completely against her. Everything's out to get her. Clearly is not know sort of how to function in a productive way, right? The tiniest thing seems to be catastrophic. Um, and it's hard to know what that's related to. If it's related to a diagnosis, which there's been all sorts of stuff that have come out, or if it's just kind of her personality or what, or the state of mind she's in this crisis is that everything is catastrophically horrible and there's no way out. But yeah, that suicide crisis line is interesting. I mean, there is a part of her in doing that that does want help, right? Even it's unclear if she's actually speaking to someone or just listening to it, but she knows that there could be help, right? If she's picking up the phone and doing that. The fact that these journals are all over the house, like, I don't know if they were hidden or not, but anyone who picked one up would see that she's not doing well. So it's hard to know if there's a piece of her that does still want help, even
And
a couple
that's
months
one of your
later.
big findings from your research, right? Is that somebody wants help. They usually don't actually want to commit the attack. They want help before it.
They don't. I mean, they're kind of dead set on it, but, when we've interviewed perpetrators and said, "Is there anything or anyone who could have stopped you?" They always say yes, right? Like, and it's you leave the notebooks around, you're dialing the number, you're posting things on social media or writing things on math homework that's going to get found, right? There is this part of you that wants someone to notice how badly you're doing. Um, and in this case, it doesn't seem like anyone did.
Yeah, and that's where, this entry on page 33 wraps up saying, I'm scared how it will all turn out when it's over. And right, my faith is weak. God forgive me. And,
Mhm.
the target is the Covenant School, which is a religious school, the school that the perpetrator attended. So there is some, grasp at traditional Catholic faith, put into this that, like, this is all, my faith is weak. God forgive me. Uh,
Yeah.
there are tropes of violence and homicide and murder throughout kind of Catholic practice. I'll put the link in the show notes if you missed it for my episode with Reverend Dr. Ingebretson, where we talked all about the monster lore and monster rhetoric. If you missed that one,
Yeah, the religiosity piece I think is interesting because she also seems to think she will meet up with a friend who was killed in a car accident, right? There's lots and lots of talk of, like, "I'll see you, when I do this." So there does seem to be some sort of belief in the afterlife. Although, if you are a traditional Catholic, you would think if you murder 6 people on your way out, you're probably not going to the good one, right? And so like you can see that it's inconsistent there. I actually am fascinated by her choice to do the covenant school because, I always say people pick the thing that represents their anger with the world, right? You pick your target because that is your grievance and you want to show, and that's who you're angry at, and that's how you get your message out. And that's what we see over and over again. That is not the case here. And she's actually quite clear, like she's not angry at that school in any way. In fact, those were like great years of her life.
Yeah, she wants to go back
Yeah.
to it. So
Yes.
page 34, the entry is saying, I think God will enter me in heaven. I'll be waiting for you, talking about the friend who died. And then the interesting is the PS note at the bottom, saying that the hairstyle will be short, like it was in middle school, and I'll be like a child again. So it's kind of this recurring theme. There's a lot of desire to return to childhood. There's rewatching DuckTales and the kids shows. There's hugging the stuffed animals, this and that. There's very much an elementary school, middle school mentality that sits throughout this, and saying that when I die and when I go to heaven, I want it to be back like it was in middle school when this person was attending the covenant school.
Which is interesting. I think, and this is why like getting this type of insight can be so helpful, because when we think about other shootings at elementary schools, they're always by former students, right? So you think about like Uvalde or Sandy Hook, and I think there's always this hunt for like, okay, what horrible thing happened to them at this school? And that's why they're targeting this school, because they're so angry at it. And in some cases, people have found little things. But this made me think like, what if that's not the driver, right? What if this was your happiest time in your life and it all got worse after that? And that's why you're going back there, right? That's a totally different mentality. When we think about prevention, actually, really different in terms of kind of the mindset and what you would expect as a former student approaching the school. And so that to me was really interesting. Like she's going there because she was happy there. It doesn't make any sense that that's why you would go murder children there, but that is her draw towards that school.
Yeah, and I mean that's on page 36. These writings. So this is now January 17th, almost exactly 2 months before. My home life is good. My room is safe. My possessions are real. My animals, my art. I'm loved. Talking about how in general, like life is good. The problem is anxiety, can't sleep, have all these thoughts, have all of this anger, have all this sadness. So even though the physical world and life is generally good, I mean, the perpetrator was from an affluent family, and the Covenant School is one of the most prestigious and expensive schools in Nashville. And despite in and out of therapy, her family was trying to get her help throughout teenage years and adolescence, and she was still living at home, and her parents are keeping like very close track of her, trying to make sure she doesn't have any access to guns and things like that. There's this very self-reflexive understanding that all of the physical things in my life are really good. What I can't deal with is this constant anxiety and suicidal ideation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Um, which again is, well, I'm not going to say it's not something. I mean, there's been certain cases where it does feel like, people, your parents care. I'm thinking of like the Santa Barbara shooter, where it's like the parents were involved, lots of mental health care, affluent life, right? Like, tons of therapists, people really trying, living in a nice apartment, right? Like all those things happening, but like can't escape the mental anguish, despite everything. And that is kind of what this feels like there. And it's hard to know in these cases. Like I'm doing a study right now looking at system contact amongst mass shooters, and it's actually a remarkable number of them do have mental health contact. I think we have this assumption that they don't, right? It's that no, but they're not on anybody's radar. But in some cases they are, and it just doesn't seem to either be consistent or the right thing or to be able to break through, or they're not being honest. And some of this in here even like sounds like some mental health speak to me, right? Like when you're in the middle of a panic or anxiety attack, like naming the things you can like see and touch and feel is a strategy. And so you can almost hear some of the therapists in some of the writing. But clearly in this moment, not enough.
Well, it goes back to a very childlike assessment of mental health, too. I mean, if a therapist is talking to a child, I think one of the common tools is there's uh, a bunch of different smiley faces, and you point to the face that represents the feelings that you're having. And on page 37, there's a drawing of a crude smiling face and then a frowning face with a tear. And my brain underlined is written next to the crying face. So that's also like going back to its very early childhood interpretation of engagement around mental health.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think just this general feeling like, they're in a safe space, their parents aren't abusing them, they have food, like all those things, but there does seem to be this anguish around like being a failure, not being where they want to be in life, a lack of social connection, maybe confusion about gender, about sexuality, a lack of relationship. There seems to be all these things um that she can't get under control and her parents can't fix for her.
Yeah, skipping ahead a little bit to page 62 in the PDF document, there's March 27th, 2023 entries. This is right before the attack.
Mhm.
Forgive me, God. This act will be inglorious, with then some text crossed out, and then writing, I'm ready to die. And that switches from there into a different journal. This one is a spiral bound notebook, because you can see in the PDF pages, starting on uh, document page 66, this is the Covenant School kind of maps and specific planning. And where this gets really got a really creepy for me is starting on page 67 of the PDF. It's back to the very clear, ordered handwriting. And this is the perpetrator's notes from taking formal pistol training classes there in
Mhm.
Tennessee. I mean, in Tennessee, it's major industry. That is a right to carry state where anybody can have as many guns as they want for any reason, and you can't take them away, even if somebody is telling you they're going to commit a mass shooting tomorrow. So there are about a dozen pages talking about the safety rules of shooting. Treat all guns like they're loaded, keep your finger off the trigger, don't point the muzzle at anyone. When I started reading this, I was thinking about, there's a lot of discussion about, teaching kids about firearms in schools, and that might be a way to prevent shootings. But this is a school shooter that, to get ready for the attack, enrolled in this training and goes through the details of the defensive pistol course. This is how you're going to feel. This is where the chaos is going to be. This is where you might freeze. Having situational awareness, color coded by, where you are in the environment, where a threat might be coming from. All of these different practice drills for firing at multiple targets, for using multiple weapons. The Covenant school shooter, somebody who went and killed children and teachers in a school, went to a training program right in Nashville that taught this person everything that they needed to know to kill people, and wrote about it in absolute excruciating detail with checklists saying exactly how they're going to carry out the attack. That, um, not something I've seen before.
No. I mean, It is that kind of hyper-focused preparation, and, you can tell, like, she's just spending hours writing these things down and drilling these things, right, and probably trying to get herself, in the mentality of getting ready to do this, but I also have never seen anything like it. I actually couldn't quite figure out what it was at first when I got to that part because I was like, "Rules for what?" But yeah, and I don't know if she's, like, copying them down from something or if this is from memory from the course or, like, just making, like, almost like a drilling sort of thing to write and rewrite, but yeah, it's something.
Yeah, I mean, to the level of detail on it, on page 72, there's a picture of a multi-target setup where the pistol instructor would, you know, right as you draw, call a number, and you need to shoot at that target to be really accurate. There's a part about SWAT tactics for, how the SWAT team is going to move and come around corners and things like that. There's a little note about um, aiming for the neck if you use a knife when you're tackled to the floor. Uh, but we have to remember, like, this is a huge industry in the country is teaching people to essentially be like military or SWAT operators. The danger of that is that you can be teaching somebody how to commit a mass shooting. And I think we've seen that play out. There are a
Mhm.
number of notes about the locations of different gun shows, how many vendor tables there will be, how to get a discount at the gun show, what the admission cost is going to be, what hours it's open, the number of minutes driving from the house to get to these, and then some notes about gun legislation with whether you're going to be required to register or not, and how to get a gun without needing a license or ID, and how to avoid a background check. So this goes from really scattered thoughts about suicide and death and despair and society, whatever else, to really clear, lucid thinking about not only how to carry out the attack, how to get the training for it, where to get the gun at the best price, at the closest place to your house, and how to avoid any pitfalls for potentially having a background check or some sort of restriction.
It does, yes, which is why I really wish we had dates on all the pages, right? It would be so interesting to see how these are intersecting with each other because is it in some moments she's, like, feeling the weight of this and just feeling overwhelmed and despair, and then it moves into this hyper preparation? Or was there kind of it was the despair thing, and then there's kind of a change, and it becomes this really hyper focused preparation? It's hard to know the way that it's ordered. Um, but I do think it's important here that there's not kind of like just one type of thinking to associate with mass shootings, right? It's not just like this desperate chaotic. It's not this hyper planning. I think it can be all of it at once and all together. Um and I this idea of like building towards this day, and I think people prepare in different ways, and we've seen that amongst mass shooters, whether that's an increased in video games or whether that's going to the shooting range a lot or posting tons of things on social media. For her it seemed to be really list making and meticulous planning.
Yeah, and that gets into document page 75 from August 2022. So this is about 9 months before the shooting, having the full supply list of things, the things to get by November. And then once it's into January and February, a detailed list about what to do in the mornings, what to do in the afternoons. Um, some pages that are kind of heavily redacted, but it kind of looks like the organization of like the loadout screen in Call of Duty or some of the other games where
Mhm.
it is broken by like different weapons and how much ammo you have for each of those. Those are on document page 74 and 75. So this detail of like, I'm going to have this weapon with this amount of ammo. The secondary weapon is going to be this with this amount of ammo. So this is into that phase of, again, like you said, really lucid planning. And then around document page 79 and 80, there's this is weird because she could just get a calendar, but it has like the dates and months listed out. and then they're being crossed off one at a time.
Mhm.
And that's, as you said, it's this marching towards this really clear planned date that had been planned for quite a while. I mean, there's the entry on page 80 is saying 118 days to go.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, my sense is, like, the list making and the drawing and the calendaring is all kind of very much part of the process for her, right? That writing of it down, even though you could just get a calendar, but sort of the rewriting, it's all part of that, like, meticulous preparation, getting in the mindset piece of it.
Yeah, it's interesting. So when the documents were first leaked, and then even on the very day of the shooting, there was a lot of discussion on the far right about the motives and cause in this event. But what I was surprised about, in document page 83, there's actually a note about President Biden and planning to
Mhm.
ban assault weapons, and having the dates listed for that, and underlined in big letters, corrupt fucker, under President Biden. So I think that we need to understand that a lot of these folks don't sit on one side or the other. There's anger towards everyone. The Oxford, Michigan school shooter wrote about Biden. The CVPA school shooter, who was black, talked about how he didn't like his blackness. Like, these are
Mhm.
very complicated sets of intersecting feelings by somebody who's in crisis and does not have a linear side that they're picking.
Yes, these people do not fit into clear boxes around their, right, bigotry or prejudice or whatever it is, their anger. It's directed in all different ways at all different people and all different things depending on the day. I would say they're angry, period. Um, but sort of where it gets directed. And yeah, you can see, I mean, it's all over the place, right? Mad about gender equity issues, mad about banning assault weapons, mad about, we don't want to turn into Europe. It's all over the spectrum and politically in terms of what she's upset about.
Yeah, and then in the mix of that, like, I'm looking at document page 88, there's a receipt from a gun store, there's the accounting on some of these gun purchases, and then right in the middle of that, there's a $41.18 purchase for Pokemon cards, and a $2.62 purchase for Disney emojis.
The Disney movie and the Pokemon card stuff, mostly because I have a kid, a young child, super into Pokemon cards, so I know a lot about it. It's a 28-year-old in the midst of all this meticulous planning a mass shooting, right? Like buying Pokemon cards it's I don't even know. Yeah, I don't know what to do with that.
I mean, Pokemon cards are pretty fun, but I won't I won't give away too much during this. Aside from that, kind of the last 20 or so pages of the document are very much like the start of it. On page 106, there's a list of all of the movies um, that the perpetrator wants to watch, and they go from The Lion King to The Shining to Fargo to The Brave Little Toaster. That's not one I'm familiar with. And Finding Nemo and Saving Private Ryan. So it's kind
Mhm.
of all over the place. And then, this is somebody who was born in the 90s, but there's a full 2 pages on 107 dedicated to the top Pink Floyd songs. Not an indictment of Pink Floyd. I think that that's very non-violent music in general. Uh, and then kind of some final accounting about the day before death when you get to page 111. Um, Interesting that on the day of death is watching Saving Private Ryan again. Very long movie. I mean, it's violent, but
Mhm.
it's mostly about uh, you know
It's sad.
being
Yeah.
a hero. Fighting for the country, fighting for the people next to you. Very very different from this. Watching a documentary about the Thurston High School shooting. Um,
Mm.
watching a documentary about Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, the Columbine shooters, watching a documentary about Adam Lanza, the Sandy Hook shooter, watching the footage from the Uvalde school shooting, and then that night, making sure you hug the stuffed animals, spend time with the stuffed animals, and then right after that, watch part 2 of the Columbine documentary, and then go to bed at 10 p.m. to wake up at 6:30 on Death Day. And there's a very jumbled picture of Death Day on document page 12, and that is the end.
Mhm. Yeah, and that's the sort of obsessively watching all those documentaries about school shooters the day before, and that's, I think, why you do have to be careful with these, right? Like, she clearly wants to be a part of this group, right? The goal, and I think there was a lot of talk about what's the motive, right? And if you read through this, it's like it was professional failure, it was personal failure. She definitely had some issues around gender identity, definitely had issues around sexual orientation, definitely had issues around like lack of social networks, right? Like, there's, feeling scammed, feeling anger, feeling just kind of feeling failure and confused about all of it. Um, and then very clearly, it basically, she says, like, my motive is infamy, right? Like, I want to be known. I want to be a part of this group that there's all these documentaries made about, right? I want the next perpetrator to watch the documentary about me, basically, right? And so I'm always wary of, like, we don't want to give them that, like, we don't want to. And so making sure that this journal does not become that, I think, is something to be careful about, right? Like, that other perpetrators aren't studying and thinking about it. It doesn't have that vibe to me, like, it's just so chaotic, that it's hard to imagine it being any sort of kind of map or something for somebody in the future. But I do know that, it's always a concern.
I mean, to go back to the discussion I had with Reverend Dr. Engelbretson, every time we discuss a monster, we run the risk of conjuring another one. And that's
Hmm.
been a trope throughout literature. And we really run into that danger here. I think the way that we can position ourselves in this is that the purpose of this discussion is because these journals might be in somebody's room right now. And there might be a parent or a friend or a relative who either doesn't want to look inside them or does and closes it out of horror,
Hmm.
or reads it and doesn't want to believe that their child is capable of this. So somebody needs to know that when you see hundreds of pages of detailed planning and drawing and writing, that's something that really needs to be taken seriously.
Absolutely. I mean, yes, peek inside the notebook. And if you see things like this, it is a very, very big red flag. And you're absolutely right that there are young people, and there's young people writing like this in journals who wouldn't do it. And that's fine. You'd rather, right, like, overreact than underreact for situations like this, and especially if there are individuals who have access to guns.
Yeah, and if the journal literally has the receipts for gun purchases printed in it, and has the dates of going to the firing range, and has a death date written in it, it is something to absolutely take very, very seriously.
Yes, absolutely. And so she killed 3 9-year-olds, right, and 3 staff members, a custodian, the head of school, and a substitute teacher. And it sounds like if she had her way, it would have been much worse.
That's the difficult thing to tell. The case files, there were about 300 rounds fired inside of the school, but all 6 of the victims killed happened within the first minute.
Yeah.
And then even though there were still 100 or more people in the school, nobody else was injured, despite unlocked doors, multiple victims. There was one point, I've watched all of the surveillance footage from the attack. There's one point where, uh, with multiple rifles and more ammo, walks directly up to a door that had the first grade class behind it, and just doesn't even try the doorknob and just walks away,
Hmm.
and goes to an upper atrium and waits for police to come there, and ultimately, dies with the suicide by cop, while still having hundreds of rounds of unspent ammo and having quite a few victims that were there in the school for about 12 minutes before police officers got there. So I think the takeaway from this is that it's so much more complicated than a 30-second talking head spot on cable news can boil it down. There's not one factor that influenced this. There wasn't one moment that influenced this. But my last question for you is, if you were treating a patient that came to you and their parents brought all of these documents to you, what kinds of things can be done to help somebody before they get to the end of this road?
Mhm. I mean, I don't think there's one answer to that. And I know there's mental health professionals struggling with this, right? We don't have this like, here's the protocol like we have for, a cognitive behavioral intervention for depression or anxiety. Like we don't have that for thinking about committing a school shooting. I think we're starting to think about if we should have that and what that would look like. But really getting at the suicidality is what I would focus on, right? Like we know a lot about suicide prevention, and at what is underneath all of this is somebody who wants to die, right? And if there was any part of her that wanted to live, she would not do this. If there was any piece of her that had hope for the future, really going after that black or white thinking, this all or nothing, I'm a success or failure, right? Like that's cognitively there's strategies for targeting that, right? Like how do we think about that type of thinking? For in this case, social connection would be huge, right? Like whether I don't know how, but figuring out the interests that maybe could connect, whether it's,
Join
Pokemon
the
card trading.
Pokemon Club.
Yes,
There's a
exactly.
Pokemon Club everywhere. There's a movie
Yes.
club. I mean, this
Yes.
is clearly somebody that had deep interests in movies, in TV shows, in the Studio Ghibli films, where one of the goals is watch every one of those before death. There are ways to connect, and I think what we need to remember is that people are treatable right up until the second that they pull the
They
trigger.
are. Yes.
In the notes, the death day is pushed back 3 different times.
Mm-hmm.
So there were 3 different times where she decided she wanted to live instead of dying that day. And
Yep.
so you just need to get one more shot at it.
Mm-hmm. Yep. If you can convince people to live and socially connect with them, it doesn't have to be some really fancy psychiatric protocol, right? It can just be, what does this person need to get them through this moment that they're in?
Well, Jill, I want to thank you so much for your time today. Dr. Jill Peterson is a forensic psychologist. She's a professor at Hamline University and the executive director of the Violence Prevention Project. Check out the book if you haven't seen it. Some great information in there. Mass shootings are preventable. There are all these opportunities. There's a year's worth of opportunities here. We see the warning signs. Get somebody connected. You just need to get them out of crisis. If they're out of crisis, they probably won't commit violence, so we can figure out the rest later. Jill, thanks so much.
Thank you, David.